The United States is prepared for a substantive dialogue with PLO representatives.
A dramatic breakthrough tonight after years of standoff between the United States and PLO chief Yassar Arafat.
Now, America's #1 primetime newscast. This is Channel 5's 10 o'clock news.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us. For 14 years, Yassar Arafat has agitated for recognition, and tonight the U.S. has finally recognized his right to speak. Channel 5's Tom Hendrick reports that in a sharp turnaround, which many are describing as historic, the State Department has decided to open a dialogue with the PLO.
2 weeks ago, the State Department described the PLO as a terrorist organization, and just yesterday rejected the call of leader Yassar Arafat for peace talks with the U.S. and Israel. But tonight, the administration said its conditions for talks, PLO renunciation of terrorism, acceptance of key UN resolutions 242 and 181, and acknowledgement of Israel's right to exist, had been met.
As a result, the United States is prepared for a substantive dialogue with PLO representatives. The objective of the United States remains, as always, a comprehensive peace in the Middle East. In that light, I view this development as one more step toward the beginning of direct negotiations between the parties, which alone can lead to such a peace.
Schultz said the new U.S. position was the result of additional statements made by Arafat today in Geneva. Arafat said it was the same stand the PLO had already proposed.
In my speech also yesterday, it was clear that we mean our people's right to freedom and national independence, according to Resolution 181, and the right of all parties concerned in the Middle East conflict to exist in peace and security, and as I have mentioned, including the State of Palestine, Israel, and other neighbors.
Secretary Schultz emphasized the policy change does not mean recognition of a Palestinian state in the occupied territories. That, he said, must be discussed through direct talks between the PLO and Israel. Israeli officials said tonight, as they did before the U.S. announcement, they have no intention of negotiating with the PLO.
Well, we are, of course, extremely disappointed by the decision taken by the Secretary of State to establish a dialogue with the PLO. We feel that this step will not enhance the peace process, and of course it's a very regrettable step in development for us.
Earlier in Geneva, the U.S. made other conciliatory gestures. Ambassador Vernon Walters called for Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories and said the political rights of both sides must be recognized.
We must tell them that we are tired of this conflict and tired of their unwillingness to make fair compromises.
Secretary Schultz said the U.S. ambassador to Tunisia has been directed to make himself available for talks with the PLO. But whether a meeting will actually take place in the waning days of the Reagan administration remains unclear. Tom Hendrick, Channel 5 News.
And joining us now with more reaction, Mr. David Peleg, the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. Mr. Peleg, Secretary of State Schultz has said the object here is not to establish a dialogue. The object is to advance the cause of peace. Israel disagrees. Why do you believe that it will not help peace prospects in your country?
Israel would like to do whatever we can to promote peace negotiation, direct negotiation between Israel and Palestinian Arabs or Jordanians. Israel does not see the PLO as a viable partner for peace. The PLO is a terrorist organization which is involved in terrorism in the Middle East, and we do not think that the PLO is a viable partner for any negotiation.
Deeds are certainly different than words. Mr. Arafat says that he will renounce terrorism, he will recognize Israel as a state. If, in fact, his deeds over the next few months show, in fact, that he does honor his word, will you sit across the table with him at that time, at a future point in time?
I think that the record of PLO in terrorism speaks for itself. At the attempt of the PLO to make a distinction between terrorism abroad, which the PLO says it is against, and between terrorism within the Middle East, in Israel and in Judea and Samaria, which they say it's not only permissible but recommended, this distinction, I think, should be condemned by anybody with common sense.
Mr. Peleg Morris-Jones, at some point, though, the PLO must be dealt with. Communication lines opened up with them. What will it take for Israel to negotiate, to even talk with the PLO? The World Court is even telling you, so many allies of the U.S. are saying you've got to open up lines of communication. What would it take?
Israel wants and looks for the day that it will negotiate with Palestinians who recognize the right of Israel to exist, who accept resolutions 242 and 338, and which are not involved in any terrorism. We are looking for such a day, but we do not think that the PLO is able to meet these demands.
Do you think Israel's crackdown on the Palestinians over the past year has backfired in the World Court of Public Opinion?
I'm not sure that this is the situation. I think that PLO terrorism is condemned all over the world, and I'm sure that the world opinion will see the justice of our cause and the sincerity of our quest for peace.
David Peleg, Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy, we thank you very much for your time this evening, sir.
Thank you very much.
President-elect Bush hasn't announced his choice for Defense Secretary yet, but he did reveal another cabinet position today. And as Channel 5's Brian Wilson reports, the announcement turned into a wide-ranging news conference.
Though President-elect George Bush had promised to bring new blood to the White House, today he chose another Reagan official to be his Secretary of Agriculture. He is Clayton Yiter, currently serving as U.S. Trade Representative.
His wide knowledge of the issues, obviously demonstrated skill, and broad experience make him quite simply the best man for this very important job.
That announcement complete, the president-elect spent more than 30 minutes answering questions on a variety of subjects. Bush said his staff has not yet had time to analyze Soviet President Gorbachev's plan to reduce troop strength in Eastern Europe. Bush was also emphatic on a related point. He will not rush into arms talks with the Soviets.
I am interested in progress, but I want it to be prudent. I want whatever steps we take to be lasting.
President-elect Bush was again asked about the role his vice president, Dan Quayle, will play in the new administration.
There may be some specific assignments, but he will be included in. I will welcome his advice. He will be a key player in the National Security Council and in the cabinet meetings if he desires to be.
But according to Bush, Quayle will not be considered for the new post of drug czar, a job mandated by Congress to be a cabinet-level position. Transition Chief Craig Fuller told reporters this morning that Bush is actively recruiting minorities and that there will likely be at least one black cabinet member. Fuller also said that former Transportation Secretary Elizabeth Dole and former Congressman Jack Kemp are on several short lists for new administration jobs. And then there is former Senator John Tower, said to be the leading contender for Secretary of Defense. But the announcement has been slow in coming. The hang-up with the Tower announcement is said to be that his FBI background check is taking longer than expected, though it should be completed by the end of this week. Tower met with members of the transition team today, but still no indication when the appointment of Secretary of Defense will be made. Brian Wilson, Channel 5 News, the White House.
It will be a bittersweet homecoming of sorts tomorrow for the families of 38 American servicemen claimed missing in the Vietnam War. Remains of what may be the largest single group of missing American servicemen will be returned to Hanoi tomorrow and then flown to a laboratory in Hawaii for positive identification. The Vietnamese government also claims to have other unspecified information about the status of 12 additional missing Americans.
In recent months, the number of U.S. Air Force jet crashes appears to have increased at an alarming rate, 16 since the beginning of October. Channel 5's Mary Norton reports on efforts to find out why.
It will take at least 3 more weeks before investigators find out what caused last week's crash of an Air Force A-10 Thunderbolt II in West Germany. 6 people died in that crash and the blaze it ignited, which destroyed 24 homes. It was the 16th Air Force jet crash since October 1st. That crash also ignited such strong protest from local residents about the training flights over their homes that the 3-week suspension is in effect. Protesters claim the flights are dangerous. In fact, Air Force records show that no fewer than 57 Air Force jets crashed in 1987, 55 already this year. Military investigators say there doesn't appear to be a common thread in these accidents, and despite all the recent fighter crashes, the Air Force says there's no significant increases compared to previous years. In fact, the serious accident rate has been dropping since 1960. The accident rate for fighter and attack jets has risen slightly in the past 2 years, from 40 to 45 aircraft. But Air Force experts say safety is not a problem.
There's no doubt in my mind that the system for reviewing flight safety is an effective one. It's much easier to ground a pilot or to ground an aircraft than to let it fly if it's unsafe.
Crash investigations look for patterns that might point to problems in aircraft design and pilot training. Pilot training can focus on the time spent in simulators compared to the time spent actually flying. Adequate time in the air is considered critical to the safety of pilots. People at the Air Force say actual flight time in training has remained fairly constant for the past few years. And they add it will be some time before the investigations into recent crashes show whether they have anything in common. Mary Norton, Channel 5 News at the Pentagon.
Former Senator Stuart Symington, once known as Mr. Air Force, died today at the age of 87. Symington, who served in the Senate for 24 years before retiring in 1976, was an early advocate of building America's military air power, but eventually softened his stance as he turned against the war in Vietnam. Former Senator Stuart Symington, dead at the age of 87.
Coming up, we'll tell you why Nancy Dickerson wants a tax on sin.
And a former LA cop bears almost all and gets indicted for fraud.